she destroyed my lawn. I destroyed her life. When an HOA board member turned my property into her personal racetrack, I didn't call the cops. I engineered suburban warfare. This is how a $39 camera, plastic spikes, and one forged document exposed a conspiracy and toppled a neighborhood tyrant. What started with tire tracks ended with, well, let's just say BMWs hate speed bumps. It started with tire marks. Not a flood, not a house fire, not crime, just tire marks across my front lawn. At first, I thought it was an Amazon truck or a random delivery guy who couldn't manage a three-point turn. But no, it wasn't random. It was intentional, repeated, and it was personal. Every morning for 2 straight weeks, I'd wake up to a fresh set of tracks carving into the wet grass in the exact same spot, my corner patch near the mailbox. What I didn't know then, those tire marks weren't just about laziness. They were covering a secret that would make the HOA wish they'd find her instead of me. So I set up a camera, the cheap kind they advertise on late night YouTube ads. That camera turned out to be the best $39 I ever spent because what it captured was a silver BMW SUV cutting across my lawn with Olympic level precision. License plate, driver's face, the works, and behind the wheel, Karen. That's not what her name was, but God, did she fit the bill? Blonde highlights like straw soaked in bleach, oversized sunglasses, and the perpetual expression of someone deeply offended by your existence. She lived 2 houses down on the cul-de-sac, and her driveway was too tight to reverse out of, according to her. You know that feeling when someone cheats at Monopoly? Multiply that by HOA bylaws and a Karen who thinks community standards means my personal playground. So she turned around by driving clean through my lawn every morning as she sped off to whatever joyless boutique she terrorized downtown. I confronted her. I said, "Hey, think you've been cutting across my lawn. That's private property." Her voice cracked like ice in lemonade, sweet, sharp, and designed to make you wince. "It's just grass," she said, her smile stretching tighter than her BMW's leather seats. "Don't be dramatic." And then she added with a smirk, "Maybe if your lawn was landscaped better, I wouldn't need to drive on it." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I tightened my jaw and said nothing, because what was there to say to someone that smug? She didn't apologize. She didn't promise to stop. She just put her car in reverse and once again turned her wheels straight over the edge of my sod. I watched the rubber carve a U-shaped scar into the earth like a knife through butter. 2 days later, she escalated. She filed a HOA complaint against me for unmaintained property obstructing vehicle turnaround. Yes, that's a real quote. She claimed my lawn was interfering with her mobility and thus lowering the aesthetic standards of the block. I checked HOA bylaws. Nothing in there about your lawn being too soft to support luxury vehicles. But Karen had allies on the board. An inner circle of petty tyrants who shared her love of wine brunches and HOA harassment. So I got a letter. Fix your lawn or face fines. It was surreal. My property was being damaged by her, and I was the one being fined. I called the HOA president, a man named Stewart, who looked like a sentient khaki. He said, "Well, maybe you should consider paving that corner for community ease of use." I said, "It's not a public driveway. It's my lawn." He chuckled and said, "Technically, everything within 10 feet of the curb can be evaluated by HOA code." I wanted to scream. I didn't. I got quiet. The kind of quiet where you stop thinking about fairness and start thinking about tactics. Karen had just triggered the first domino, and she was about to find out I played chess, not checkers. Because if she thought this was about grass, she had no idea what was coming next. I didn't touch the lawn. I left the ruts and tire scars as they were, like a chalk outline on a crime scene, and waited because I knew Karen wasn't done. I was right. Day 14, her tires crushed my last intact sprinkler. Day 21, the HOA fined me $175 for unapproved soil texture. That's when I realized this wasn't about grass anymore. This was power theater. Karen wasn't just driving through my lawn. She was stomping through every semblance of neighborhood decency with spike heels and a clipboard. I appealed the fine, attaching video evidence of her SUV Joy riding over my property like it was the Indy 500. The response, video evidence not admissible due to potential privacy violations. Translation, Karen had the board on a leash, and it had her name engraved on the collar. One of board members, Helen, the type who wore pearls to garbage day, sent me a personal letter suggesting an attitude of neighborly cooperation. I started calling them the Coven. Karen, Helen, and Stuart, the HOA triumvirate from 7th Circle of suburban hell. Meanwhile, the ruts were getting deeper. Karen wasn't just cutting the corner anymore. She was accelerating through it, leaving divots deep enough to drown a squirrel. My sprinkler had crushed. My solar lawn light snapped like a breadstick. The camera footage showed three things: her license plate, a black pouch, and a truth I couldn't unsee. But how do you prove a conspiracy when the conspirators make the rules? But the cherry on top, she started waving. Every time she drove across the lawn, she'd smile and wave like she was starring in a holiday parade. One morning, I caught her lowering her window and throwing a to-go cup onto my porch. Not even the lawn, onto the porch. I knew what this was. This was control. It wasn't about the route. It was about me obeying, submitting. And when I didn't, she brought out the big guns. The next HOA meeting, which I wasn't even formally invited to, had my name on the agenda. Agenda item number 3, landscaping hostility and neighborly cooperation violation. I showed up anyway. They weren't expecting that. Karen sat at the center of the long table like a low-budget dictator. Stuart was already nervously rearranging his manila folders. Mr. Reynolds, Karen began, pretending to reference notes she absolutely didn't have. Your behavior has become increasingly unneighborly. Several residents have complained. Oh, I said, is that before or after they drove across my private property? Karen didn't flinch. You've created an environment of tension, she replied smoothly. We are a community. We rely on trust, not tactics. It was stunning. Gaslighting so refined, it should have been served with wine and cheese. Helen chimed in, we reviewed your complaint, but the HOA cannot be weaponized to enforce personal grudges. Stuart, passive as ever, added, the board recommends you install low-profile concrete edging to discourage vehicular encroachment. Vehicular encroachment, that's what they called it, like she was a confused Roomba, not a 50-year-old narcissist on wheels. I asked if they had addressed the fact she was violating state trespass laws. Karen cut in. Let's not make this litigious. That wouldn't reflect well on anyone. I left the meeting with nothing resolved except one thing. I was now enemy number 1 of the HOA elite. That night, someone left a note on my porch, anonymous, handwritten. It read, we don't like snitches around here. The next morning, someone dumped a bag of grass clippings on my porch. Just the clippings. As if my real crime was daring to care about turf. Karen, emboldened, started taking liberties. Her SUV wasn't just cutting across my corner. She was pulling forward, backing up, sometimes even idling, turning my lawn into a personal sandbox of entitlement. One evening, I stepped outside just in time to see her rev her engine and do a full 3-point spin in the middle of my yard, flinging mud like confetti at a frat party. She saw me. She smiled. You should pave it, she said, and peeled out like a teenage delinquent. I didn't respond, but something in me snapped into place like a loaded spring. The line had been crossed. No more polite requests. No more HOA bureaucracy. The Karen wanted to play games on my property. Then fine, I'd redesign the board. Every time she filed a fine, I documented a crime. Every muddy tire track hit a darker trail. And the first new piece I planned to add, hidden, sharp, and completely legal. Let me be clear. I wasn't trying to hurt Karen. I was trying to stop her. The distinction matters because when you deal with people like her, You have to be twice as smart and 10 times more patient. So I did what any rational man would do after being framed by an HOA kangaroo court. I opened up a new browser tab and typed legal lawn deterrence for trespassing vehicles. What I found was inspiring. Not just motion sensors and sprinkler systems. No, I found a whole subculture of suburban warfare, pressure sensitive noisemakers, remote activated car alarms, and my personal favorite, retractable driveway spikes. Of course, most of those were too expensive or downright illegal, but that didn't mean I was out of options. My uncle, a retired civil engineer and proud conspiracy theorist, which made him the perfect partner in this low-key siege. So let me get this straight, he said, sipping lukewarm coffee in my garage. This lady's using your lawn like it's her own personal racetrack. I nodded. He grinned like a man who just found a coupon for dynamite. Let's make it bumpy then. We spent 3 nights laying the groundwork, literally. Not metal spikes, too obvious, too dangerous, but plastic speed bumps buried just beneath the surface. Disguised under a thin layer of sod and secured with turf staples, the kind used in off-road bike trails. Not sharp enough to puncture, but hard enough to destroy alignment. Karen would never see them. And if she asked, oh, I'm just aerating the soil, I'd say. And I did, in fact, order aeration tools and leave them visibly lying in the yard. Always keep your alibi lawn deep. For the next 48 hours, I watched and waited. Nothing happened. Normal people would have sued. But normal people don't know what I found in Karen's trash. Then on day 3, I heard the sound I'd been waiting for. A deep mechanical thump followed by the angry rev of a BMW engine. Karen's car jolted like it had run over a bear trap. She slammed the brakes, reversed, and rolled down her window. What the hell is wrong with your yard? She yelled. I shrugged from my porch. Just finished aerating. Got to keep that soil healthy. She opened her door and took 2 angry steps toward me. Stilettos sinking into the grass like spears into pudding. You're tampering with the landscape on HOA controlled curb frontage. She hissed. That's an infraction. Actually, I said, pulling a folder from under my arm. Per page 9, subsection 3C, homeowners are encouraged to maintain soil drainage and turf integrity using approved ground support methods. I handed her a laminated copy. It smelled like fresh toner and revenge. She didn't read it. She just squinted and said, You think you're clever? I smiled. No, I am clever. You just didn't notice until your tires started losing traction. Her expression morphed into something new. Uncertainty. A crack in the porcelain. She turned and stomped back to her car, but as she reversed, her tires caught on the buried ridges. I could hear the undercarriage scrape. Beautiful. That night, she filed another HOA complaint. The charge, improper landscaping elevation, creating vehicular hazard. Stewart sent me a warning. Your yard appears to be uneven and dangerous. Please submit a leveling plan. I emailed back. No problem. I've attached my aeration strategy, soil health data, and a surveyor's diagram showing compliance with slope ordinances. I CC'd Helen and the city zoning office. They backed off. I had played their game, but I also out-paperworked them, and that was a language the HOA couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, Karen kept hitting the ridges. Her suspension started sounding like a dying blender. One morning, I noticed her front bumper had a new scuff. Enjoy your next fine, she hissed. So I enjoyed serving hers to a judge. Later that week, she started cutting wider turns, trying to avoid the zone entirely, which was great until she misjudged it and clipped my mailbox. Federal offense. But I didn't call the cops. I didn't even flinch. I just installed a new one, metal reinforced, earthquake-proof, and approved by the USPS. Karen looked at it the next day with pure disgust. I could feel her rage from inside the house. She was losing the war, but more importantly, she was losing her nerve. Every time she drove past now, she hesitated, slowed, squinted at the lawn like it might explode. It was working. She was paranoid, frustrated, and starting to crack. But I wasn't done because even though she stopped driving across the lawn, she still hadn't learned to respect the line. And if she thought HOA was going to protect her forever, she was about to get a rude awakening. One clause, one complaint, and buried truth at a time. I thought I understood Karen. I thought this was about dominance, ego, petty suburbia. But it turns out I'd underestimated her in a way that surprised even me. It started when I got curious. Dangerously curious about why someone would so insistently take the same shortcut through my property every single day, even when it was actively damaging her vehicle. So one morning, I followed her, not in some creepy trench coat kind of way. I just got in my car, waited until she passed, and pulled out after her at a reasonable distance. I expected a trip to her job or the usual high-end strip mall where she spent her days pretending to be busier than she was. But that's not where she went. She drove 2 blocks, turned onto a street lined with rundown duplexes, and pulled into a driveway. A man opened the front door, shaggy hair, oversized hoodie, looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Karen didn't get out of the car. He walked up to her window. They exchanged a few words and she handed him something. A bag, maybe a pouch. Definitely not groceries. 10 seconds later, she peeled off and drove away like she didn't want to be seen. I followed from a distance again. She stopped at a park, got out, tossed the empty pouch in a public trash can, then drove home like it was just another Tuesday. Something didn't add up. So I went back to the trash can. And yes, I'm not proud of this, but I dug through it. Found a small black drawstring bag with a pharmacy label torn off. No pills inside, but residue of burnt foil and chemical smoke. My stomach turned. I wasn't just dealing with HOA gains. I was staring down the ugly truth. Karen was running something shady. And suddenly, the lawn made sense. She wasn't just taking a shortcut. She was cutting security cameras, dodging a neighbor's Ring doorbell. My lawn was the only blind spot on her route. The next day, I installed 2 trail cams camouflaged in fake rocks. I had receipts now. Over the course of a week, I caught her making the same trip 4 times. Always to that same house, always handing something over, and always exiting fast. I checked county records, registered to a man named Darren K. Moss. No job listed. Arrested twice for possession with intent. That's when everything clicked. Karen's daily detour wasn't about laziness. It was about laundering her image while laundering something else. The HOA, just a smokescreen. Her ego, a mask, and I was the one variable she hadn't accounted for. So I played a dangerous card. I called a friend of mine who works for the local PD. I didn't want her busted. I wanted her cornered. I said, I think one of my neighbors is trafficking something. I have video. I'm not asking for a raid. I'm asking for presence. Within 48 hours, a cruiser was parked on our street during her usual commute time. She saw it, and like clockwork, she didn't make the drop that day. She turned around, this time in her own driveway. The message landed, but more importantly, I wasn't the only one watching her anymore. Then the HOA received an anonymous email, a compilation of her license plate driving over private property, several high-speed corner clips, and time-stamped footage labeled possible illicit activity. Consider escalation. I know it was received because Stewart replied to the entire board by accident in an email that included the line. This could implicate the association if it goes public. They had been shielding her, protecting her, maybe unknowingly, maybe not. But now they were exposed. I printed that email. I laminated it. I added it to my HOA binder right next to bylaws and lawn permits. I wasn't just dealing with Karen now. I was dealing with a cover-up. But for the first time, she was losing ground. Literally and metaphorically. She stopped waving when she drove by. Her speed dropped. Her SUV got quieter. She started using her driveway again. No more stunt turns. But it was too late. The truth had bloomed. Ugly and undeniable. Karen's shortcut had nothing to do with time. It had everything to do with secrecy. And secrecy is a fragile thing, especially when it's being dragged across someone's front lawn. Karen didn't crumble. She counterattacked. And she did it the only way she knew how, by going scorched earth through bureaucracy and rumor. 2 days after the cruiser scare, I found a red tag zip tied to my front door. Zoning compliance check required. Exterior structure in question. I hadn't built anything. I hadn't even changed the paint. But someone, Karen, had filed an anonymous complaint about unauthorized modifications. The city inspector showed up the next morning, clipboard in hand, and I gave him the tour of absolutely nothing. "You've got a neighbor with too much time on her hands," he said, rolling his eyes and taking photos of my perfectly boring fence. I left. But that left dried up fast because 2 hours later an HOA representative knocked on my door. "We received a noise complaint," she said flatly. "From whom?" I asked. "It was anonymous," she lied. "It says you were operating machinery at 1 a.m. I pointed to my porch camera and played footage of my quiet, undisturbed front yard under starlight. "Want me to email you a copy?" I asked. She stammered, then said, "We'll close this one out, but if there's another, there will be consequences." Actually, I cut in, "This is harassment." And she knew it. But the next day, war got louder. Karen printed flyers. Flyers. A bright yellow sheet appeared on every mailbox on the block titled, "Is our neighborhood still safe?" It listed ongoing disturbances, hidden lawn hazards, and suspected camera surveillance, followed by concerned residents are encouraged to contact the HOA to preserve the peace. It didn't name me directly, but it didn't have to. Everyone knew. I confronted her. I walked right up to her yard while she pruned an already dead rose bush. "You're spiraling," I said. She didn't flinch. "I'm protecting the neighborhood," she replied like a cult leader in pearls. "From what?" "Oversight." I asked. "From you," she snapped, dropping the clippers. "You're aggressive, obsessive, and you're trespassing right now." I stepped back. "Trespassing? That's rich coming from you." She smiled. "Enjoy your next fine." It came within 48 hours. This one was for lawn obstruction due to unapproved decorations. Translation: I had left a small flag in my yard, an old Army battalion banner from my dad's service. I appealed it with a picture of her massive inflatable Halloween spider that blocked her whole front porch. The HOA didn't respond, not with words. Instead, they scheduled a community compliance audit, which is just a fancy term for selective harassment. The HOA board walked the street with clipboards and smug expressions, stopping in front of my house for over 10 minutes. I took pictures from my window. The next day, my trash bin got knocked over. My mail arrived torn, and someone keyed the side of my truck just deep enough to matter. I had no proof it was her, of course. That was the Karen magic. She weaponized anonymity like a shield. But what she didn't realize was that the more she attacked, the more allies I gained. The Johnsons across the street. Quiet retirees knocked on my door and said, "You're not the only one she's pulled this on." A single mom down the block added. She got me fined for having a stroller on my porch. One by one, the neighborhood peeled away from her like dead bark from a rotten tree. And the most poetic part, Karen didn't notice. She thought the flyers worked, that her paranoia campaign had painted me as unstable, but the only thing she'd painted was a target on her back because now everyone was watching. And I had just submitted a full report to the state HOA regulatory board, complete with documents, emails, photos, and video. This wasn't lawn warfare anymore. It was legal warfare. And Karen had just waltzed into a courtroom with gasoline and matches. I wasn't bluffing. Karen thought she was locked in a neighborhood turf war, but I was building a legal dossier while she was still scribbling flyers. And the moment I had all my documents lined up, timestamps, HO emails, surveillance footage, city responses, and signed affidavits from 5 neighbors, I lawyered up, not with just any attorney, with Elliot Drake. a former HOA board member turned private property rights advocate. He looked over my binder like it was a gourmet meal. "Oh, she's cooked," he said. "This is malicious property interference, false reporting, civil harassment, and a First Amendment flag violation if we want to push it." I did. We filed in small claims court for $10,000. Property damage, defamation, and emotional distress. But that was just the start. We also sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA board, personally addressed to Stuart, Helen, and Karen, accusing them of coordinated harassment and failure to act in good faith. They didn't take it well. Stuart emailed me directly. "We regret that you feel the board's actions have caused undue stress. We are committed to fairness." I forwarded it to Elliot. He replied with 3 words: "Standard weak sauce." Meanwhile, something interesting happened. The HOA website suddenly listed a new agenda item for the upcoming meeting: Board Code of Conduct Review. Karen was rattled. I could see it in the way she started parking in her garage, windows up, avoiding eye contact with the neighbors she used to smirk at. She stops driving near my lawn entirely, took the long way out of the cul-de-sac. Her SUV had new tires, but the paranoia was wearing hers thin. 2 days before the hearing, I got a call. It was Stuart, nervous, rambling. "Maybe we can resolve this outside the courts. Mediation, perhaps. For the good of the neighborhood." I said I offered peace. She ran it over with a luxury vehicle. Silence. "I can't speak for Karen," he muttered. "Exactly," I replied. "And that's why you're listed separately in the complaint." He hung up. On court day, she showed up wearing sunglasses indoors and a neck brace. Yes, a neck brace. I almost laughed until Elliot whispered, classic sympathy stunt. "Judges see right through it." He was right. The judge barely acknowledged it. We laid out everything chronologically, professionally, with receipts. Karen tried to claim the spikes under my lawn were booby traps. But Elliot responded they were blunt plastic ridges used for drainage and soil stabilization. Here's the invoice. Here's the manufacturer's safety certification. Then came the flyer. "Would you say this targets a specific resident?" the judge asked, reading the flyer. Karen stammered. "It's a general statement for safety." The judge looked at the audience. 6 of my neighbors were in the gallery, arms crossed, faces tight. And yet, only one house was fined after this circulated. Only one resident's lawn was audited. Only one individual's army flag was deemed decorative clutter. Karen tried to pivot, but she was spinning on marbles. Now, when we revealed the HOA emails, especially Stewart's implication line, the judge paused and said, "Is your board in the habit of protecting criminal behavior for the sake of appearances?" Stewart visibly shrunk. Helen looked like she wanted to disappear. Karen, she started sweating under that neck brace. We won the case. The court awarded me $6,800, every penny for damages and legal fees. But the judge didn't stop there. "I'm recommending a full third-party audit of your HA's procedures and conduct," he added. "If you've retaliated against homeowners using this board as a weapon, that's a separate matter entirely." I left the courtroom with Elliot nodding like a proud general. But the real joy came the next day. An email blast from the HOA. "Karen Halverson has voluntarily resigned her position as board treasurer effective immediately." It was written in passive corporate speak, but the message was loud and clear. I had nuked her from the inside, and now she was radioactive. People stopped waving at her. The mom group stopped inviting her to dog park wine days. Her gossip network dried up like spilled Chardonnay on a hot dashboard. But best of all, a week later, the HOA passed a new rule. No board member may issue fines without independent verification and a second signature. It was called the Reynolds Amendment. I didn't ask for it. They gave it to me anyway. And now every time I walk past the new bulletin board, I smile because Karen tried to break me with rules. And I buried her with them. Karen thought resignation would protect her, that stepping down from the HOA would reset the battlefield. That if she slithered back into civilian life, people would just forget. But this wasn't a reset. It was a reveal. Because once the lawsuit was public, and yes, it was public record, people started asking questions, and I didn't have to answer them, her actions did. Mrs. Baxter, the sweet widow 3 houses down, posted on the neighborhood app. Was anyone else fined for porch decor in the last 6 months? I'd love to compare notes. Within 3 hours, 17 comments rolled in. Garden gnomes, wreaths, flower pots, even a memorial plaque had been cited, all targeted at homes Karen didn't like, or rather people she didn't like. One neighbor, Danielle, dropped the real bomb. Karen fined me for a planter she gifted me at last year's wine social. That was it. The thread exploded. People realized they'd been manipulated, not managed. Fined for taste, punished for opinions, and worse, a few had paid. Karen had generated over $2,000 in violation fines that had never been reviewed or seconded. Stewart tried to calm the chaos. All funds were processed by HOA standards, he wrote. But a whistleblower, a newer board member named Trevor, leaked internal spreadsheets. Of the $2,000 collected, over $400 had been reimbursed to Karen for HOA expenditures. No receipts, no details, and definitely no board votes. The neighborhood smelled blood in the hydrangeas. Someone printed the spreadsheet and taped it to the HOA kiosk. In bold marker, they wrote, "Where's the money, Karen?" Her response? She started walking her dog at 5 a.m. wearing sunglasses, hoodie up as if hiding from a crowd she used to rule. But it wasn't just finances. It was the route. The real reason she drove across my lawn. That footage I had, the early morning drop-offs at Darren Moss' house. Turns out I wasn't the only one who'd seen it. A tech-savvy teenager on the block ran a Karen watch TikTok and posted a blurred version of the clip titled, "My HOA Karen is doing crimes now." It went viral. Thousands of views. Then local news caught wind. A reporter came knocking asking about HOA corruption and resident complaints. I declined to comment because I didn't have to. Everyone else was talking. The Karen Files, as the thread became known on our app, became a running document cataloging every offense, every vendetta, every petty power play. She couldn't walk outside without a neighbor's curtain twitching, couldn't park without getting side-eyed. Her gossip group disbanded, her invites revoked. The PDA removed her from the fundraising committee pending transparency review. Karen, the queen of suburban politics, had been dethroned by the very tools she once used to rule. But the final blow came from an unexpected place, Darren Moss. Arrested for possession again, this time with intent to distribute, the police released body cam footage of the arrest, including a frequent visitor log tied to his surveillance system. Guess whose license plate was on it? Karen's. More than a dozen times. The implication was enough. No charges for her yet, but her social currency imploded. One neighbor asked if she was running drugs. Another said, "I don't care if it's protein shakes." If you're lying to everyone while wrecking their yards, you don't deserve the HOA discount wine club. Karen's husband, who'd been suspiciously absent through all this, quietly put the house up for sale. The listing was live for 6 days before being pulled. Rumor had it he found out everything about the fake fines, the Darren visits, the lies. He moved out first. She stayed behind for now, but her empire was gone. And me, I got a thank you note from Stewart. No apology, no emotion, just one line. The HOA will be conducting quarterly compliance audits moving forward. Translation: we'll never trust a Karen again. By this point, Karen had lost her HOA throne, her social status, and allegedly her marriage. But if I'd learned anything, it was this. Karen wasn't wired to retreat quietly. She was the type who'd set the ship on fire rather than admit it was sinking. So when she snapped, it wasn't subtle. It was biblical. It started with one final HOA stunt. A forged letter. Yes, forged. A notice posted to my front door claiming to be an emergency violation citation for retaliatory landscaping aggression. That's not even a real thing, but it was printed in the same HOA letterhead, sealed in the same type of envelope, and signed with what looked like Stewart's initials. I knew immediately it was fake because Stewart had resigned 3 days earlier. The signature dated after his resignation. It was so sloppy it was insulting. So I didn't react. Not at first. I let Karen stew, thinking she'd won the last round. Then I forwarded it to Elliot, who passed it to a forensic doc examiner. 3 days later, we had confirmation. It was forged, not just suspicious, criminally fraudulent. I could have pressed charges right then, but poetic justice demanded patience. Because that same week, Karen crossed her own Rubicon. She dug up my lawn. Literally, I came home one afternoon to find 3 square patches of turf missing from the corner where her SUV used to turn. As if removing the earth would somehow erase the past. My trail cam caught the whole thing. Karen in a visor and gardening gloves, hacking at my grass like it owed her money. She even brought a bucket. Who brings a bucket to a felony? I called the police. Not 911, but the non-emergency line. We're dispatching an officer, they said. Please don't confront her directly. Too late because Karen was still on my property when they showed up. She was crouched down with a trowel when the cruiser rolled up. She tried to stand but twisted her ankle, collapsing into the stolen turf pile like a Shakespearean villain in Act V. Ma'am, what are you doing on this property? The officer asked. Gardening, she said breathlessly. This grass is invasive. Invasive? The cop asked. You dug up sod from someone else's yard. It was threatening my alignment, she cried, which was not a phrase that made legal sense. The officer turned to me. Do you want to press charges? I said, no, I wanted to do something worse. I wanted to document everything. So we filed a full report, added it to the court record, and served her with a temporary restraining order the next morning. Not just for me, but my property line. Karen could no longer come within 10 feet of my lawn. 10 glorious, legally enforced feet. And now, every time she stepped outside, she had to measure her own rage with a tape measure. But that wasn't even the most humiliating part. No, that came when the neighborhood had its annual spring stroll. A casual walkabout where neighbors showcased flowers, landscaping, and yard projects. For 3 years, Karen's yard had won first place. This year, she wasn't even nominated. But guess who was? Me. My retaliatory landscaping, as she called it, had become the talk of the block. The repurposed rock beds, the subtle lighting, the professionally resodded patches, all perfectly curated to highlight the precise zone she used to drive through. Someone even asked if it was an art installation representing suburban resilience. I said yes because it was. During the spring stroll, Karen stood in her window watching as groups of neighbors walked past her house without stopping. One couple even crossed the street to avoid her entirely. And the best part, my lawn now had motion-activated audio. Not loud, just enough to play the sound of a car horn honking anytime someone stepped on the old tire track. Karen triggered it on her way to get the mail. She flinched, looked up, and saw me waving from my porch with a mug that said hashtag lawn and order. She went inside. That was the last time I saw her outside during daylight. She tried one final thing, a letter to the city claiming I had built a harassment sound system on public frontage. The inspector came. He smiled. Honestly, it's creative. Case closed. Karen had no allies left. Her final desperate move to reclaim dominance didn't just fail. It turned her into a punchline. Even the HOA newsletter ran a piece titled Turf Wars, Why We're Updating Property Boundaries. No names, just a photo of grass. Mine. By the time the restraining order kicked in and my motion sensor honk horn became neighborhood legend, Karen's life had officially entered the collapse phase. But what came next wasn't dramatic. It was bureaucratic, cold, clinical, and unstoppable. It started with the audit. Remember the $400 in HOA reimbursements she skimmed without board approval? Turns out that was just the appetizer. A third-party accounting firm hired after my lawsuit fallout reviewed the entire HOA financials for the last 2 years. What they found was damning. Karen had reimbursed herself over $2,300 in personal expenses. Things like decorative event napkins, she bought them from Etsy for her daughter's bridal shower, emergency HOA lunch meetings held at a restaurant her cousin owned, and best of all, vehicle maintenance related to HOA inspections. Yes, she used HOA funds to fix the suspension damage caused by my buried turf ridges. You can't make that up. When the report dropped, Stewart sent it straight to every homeowner. No spin, no excuses, just receipts. Karen's name was on every line item. 2 days later, a vote was held for permanent HOA disqualification. She wasn't just removed. She was banned from ever holding a board position again. Not just on our block, citywide. The mayor's office got wind of it and proposed a new ethics clause for all neighborhood associations. They called it the Halverson Clause. Her last name became a warning label. But that wasn't the end. A group of homeowners led by Danielle and two others Karen had fined into submission filed a civil suit against her personally demanding reimbursement for what they called malicious enforcement, targeted harassment, and emotional duress. Elliot helped them draft it. I wasn't part of the suit. I'd had my day in court. This was their turn. Karen tried to fight it, but without the HOA's backing, she was just a woman with mounting legal bills and no support system. And her real estate agent, she finally returned. The listing went live again. This time with a noticeable price drop, motivated seller, quiet block, good drainage. The irony practically mowed itself. Open house day came and went. No takers. The whispers got louder. The lawsuit, the restraining order, potential police investigation into her connections with Darren Moss. Even the local paper ran a piece titled Suburbia in Turmoil, How HOA Politics Sparked a Legal Inferno. Karen's face wasn't shown, but the article mentioned a treasurer accused of financial abuse and neighbor harassment. That was enough. The bank pulled out of her refinancing deal. Rumor was her credit was a disaster. Her car got repoed at 6 a.m., and yes, someone caught it on video. The footage went viral on TikTok again. Captioned, Karen's chariot has fallen. And then quiet. She stopped answering her door. Packages piled up. Grass overgrew her once manicured yard. The same neighbors she used to fine for plastic flamingos now watched her property decay with satisfied silence. Then one Thursday morning, a moving truck pulled up. No goodbyes, no farewell wine party, just a single post on the neighborhood forum from canned_Halverson. Due to recent events, I am choosing to relocate. I wish everyone peace and grace. The comments were brutal. One said, don't forget your trowel. Another just posted a gif of a lawnmower running over the word bye. She left before the sun came up. Slipped away like a ghost in a cul-de-sac that had finally learned how to protect itself. No one waved. No one helped load the truck. The final insult. She left tire marks on her own front lawn. One last act of self-inflicted sabotage. And as the truck disappeared, my mailbox lit up with a thank you card, anonymously delivered. No return address. Inside was a note that simply said, you saved the street. When Karen left, the silence was unnerving. For a week, it felt like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting to see if the storm would circle back. But storms don't come back when they've been dismantled. They just leave wreckage. Her house sat empty for 11 days. The lawn choked with weeds. Flyers jammed into the doorframe. A for sale sign now sun-faded and pitiful. Then one morning, a small hybrid SUV pulled up. A young couple stepped out. Mid-30s, toddler in tow, dog in the back seat. Real shoes on the ground types. They smiled at everyone who walked by and waved at me while unpacking. The next day, I brought over a pie. I don't bake. I bought it from the grocery store and passed it off like it was homemade because that's what the neighborhood deserved. Some returned to decency, even if slightly artificial. Their names were Max and Isla. And unlike Karen, they asked questions instead of issuing ultimatums. Is the HOA really as crazy as the Zillow reviews say? Max asked, half laughing. I handed him a flash drive. Everything you need to know about surviving this cul-de-sac is on there. He plugged it in that night. Next morning, I heard him laughing from his front porch. You made a PowerPoint. I made a ward journal, I corrected. But they understood, and more importantly, they contributed. Within a week, the moldy garden gnome rule was overturned. They petitioned to install a new community mailbox with the locked parcel bin. They even offered to host a welcome back block party because, as Isla put it, we know the street's been through a lot. And somehow the idea caught fire. The Johnsons brought lemonade. Danielle grilled. Someone even hired a local band made up of retirees who used to play jazz back in the day. The whole street showed up. Lawn chairs unfolded like declarations of peace. And me? I stood at the corner where it all started, watching kids run barefoot across my fully healed turf. Not a single tire mark in sight. Someone asked about the spikes. I smiled. Retired, I said. They did their job. Max proposed renaming our side of the street Green Zone. Part joke, part tribute. Even the city inspector showed up and said, this is the most peaceful I've seen this block in 5 years. Karen's name was now code, a warning. When someone mentioned a petty complaint, a neighbor would whisper, careful. That's a little Karen. But what made it perfect? What made it poetic? Was this. 3 months after her departure, the house finally sold again to a landscape architect. No lie, he showed up in khakis and work boots, surveyed the whole property, and within a week had stripped every last piece of Karen's signature design. No more angular shrubs, no more stone lions. He replaced everything with native flowers and pollinator beds. He turned the space Karen had used as her power pedestal into a bee-friendly community-funded garden. The HOA approved it unanimously. Danielle cried. The neighborhood named it Halverson Hollow, not to honor her, but to bury her nonsense with irony so deep it needed irrigation. And me, I finally removed the cameras, took down the motion horn. I walk my property now with peace underfoot and pride in every blade of grass, because Karen thought she ruled this neighborhood. But what she didn't understand is that people remember, not just who terrorized them, but who stood up. And while she tried to pave over us with control and fear, we planted something stronger. Something that doesn't need HOA approval to grow. Community, justice, and a damn beautiful lawn.